Welcome to the Who's Left podcast, a show about Indiana politics, history, and culture from the unapologetic perspective of the social democratic left. My name is Scott Aaron Rogers, and I'm recording from Bloomington. So, I don't have a traditional episode for you this week, but I do have some great content. Anyway, this past Saturday, I attended and streamed live the People Powered Democracy Town Hall from the Unitarian Universalist Church here in Bloomington. The event was standing room only, as community leaders, legislators, constituents, and grassroots organizations gathered to discuss healthcare, education, and voting rights. State Senator Shelley Yoder and Representative Matt Pierce talked about current legislation moving through the General Assembly, with particular emphasis on cuts to Medicaid and public education. Local Republican officials, including Senate Majority Leader Rod Bray, State Reps Peggy Mayfield, Dave Hall, and Bob Heaton, as well as Congresswoman Erin Houchin, were asked to participate but either declined or ignored the invitation. The purpose of this event, which featured speakers from the Indiana Rural Summit, Reverse Citizens United, Hoosier Action, Indiana Coalition for Public Education, and the Bloomington chapter of Medicare for All Indiana, was to make meaning of how dark money has negatively influenced our legislation, with an emphasis on healthcare and education policy that will directly impact Hoosiers. Real quick, before we turn to the town hall, I'd like to take a minute to thank you all for your support, for liking and sharing on social media, for forwarding our articles and podcast episodes, for commenting, leaving reviews, and providing feedback, and especially for the financial support paid subscriptions provide. Your contributions have helped me make meaningful connections with fascinating people from across Indiana and beyond. We are building a network of Hoosiers dedicated to making this state and its government work for all of us, not just the elite few. I would like to dedicate my full time to you, this community, and Indiana's future, but I need your financial support to do so. All I'm asking is $5 a month or $50 a year to help me write more, research more, organize more, and keep improving Who's Left. So please visit who'sleft.us for all of our articles, episodes, archives, and again, if you can, consider a paid subscription while you're there. We're also on Facebook, Blue Sky, YouTube, and TikTok at Who's Left. And I'm still on Instagram, Threads, and Twitter at ScottRodge78, as well as ScottRodge78 at Hoosier.social on Mastodon. Tell the others. Let's build a radically democratic Indiana together. Thanks again. Now, here is the People Powered Democracy Town Hall recorded Saturday, February 22nd.
Okay, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this town hall. My name is Doug Davis, and I'm a member of Reverse Citizens United, one of the sponsors of this event. Because we are reaching the midpoint of the Indiana General Assembly, many of us believed it was important to hear from our legislators about what's going on, especially in view of the change in leadership in the state and the uncertainty facing us all because of the massive changes in Washington. Today, we will have some introductory remarks by Jim Allison. Then we will move on to panel members who will put a spotlight on the most important bills affecting health care, education, and voting. This will be followed by a question and answer session for about an hour. Index cards will be passed out for your questions. We will not have an intermission. This is supposed to be a 2-hour meeting. If you need to use the bathroom, they're out through that door in the foyer. If at any time during this procedure, if you can't hear, please raise your hand and we'll crank up the volume. Can anybody hear okay? What? Who said what? Before we begin, I'd like to recognize the former mayor of Bloomington, Indiana, Tommy Allison. Are there any other elected representatives present today? If so, stand and be recognized. Nobody here. Charlotte? Charlotte Zitlow is there. Now I'd like to introduce Jim Allison, one of the founders of Reverse Citizens United, and he will speak to how we got here and the impact of the Supreme Court decision in 1910 concerning Citizens United. Jim?
Thank you, Doug. Welcome, American patriots. You know, before the Civil War, our corporations were really pretty tame because they were chartered by the states, just like they are today. And if your corporation misbehaved, your state could simply pull your charter, seize your assets, and put you out of business overnight. But the Civil War changed everything. The Civil War made railroad corporations in particular richer than God, almost. And if you're that rich, as I'm sure you can all appreciate, you cannot abide your states telling you what you can or cannot do with it. We respect things like freight rates for farmers, getting their goods to market. No. So what do you do with your money? Well, you use some of it to rent about a dozen lawyers or so out of Harvard and Yale, you know, the very best money can buy. And you tell them to handle the problem. And if one of them happens to have read the latest version of the Constitution, you know, the one that has that 14th Amendment to protect former slaves from abusive southern states, you know that one. There's your answer. Simply get the Supreme Court to declare corporate personhood, and there it is. Your corporation now has the very same constitutional protections as any living person. But, and there's a big but, you got those protections dishonestly. And here's how you did it. In 1886, the court was about to convene for a very routine tax case, a very dull case, that was later going to be called Santa Clara v. Southern Pacific, which I'm sure many of you have heard of. But before the court convened that day, they were just milling about, you know, and shooting the breeze. Someone said, "Raise your hand if you favor corporate personhood." And all hands went up. Everyone. And the court reporter happened to witness this episode. And then the court went ahead and convened to do their business for the day. And they decided in that business that Santa Clara County out in California really should not have taxed Southern Pacific Railroad out in California for some fences along its roadbed. And the court took up no constitutional issues. It just made that decision, according to none other than Chief Justice Waite. Justice Waite. But when that court reporter, who happens to be a lawyer and happened to be also a former railroad executive, began to write his headnote for the case. Now, a headnote, if you may not know, is a kind of Cliff Notes summary of the case. It has no legal standing. It's the work of the reporter, not the court, but he writes the summary for it. He asked Chief Justice, who was an old friend of his, they were old friends together, whether he should include that pretrial bit about corporate personhood in his headnote. And Waite trusted him to use his judgment and told him to use his own judgment. Yeah, use your own judgment. And he did. And the bit wound up in the head note for the convenience of anyone too lazy to read the actual boring opinion. And there it was, just waiting to be used. And it sat there dormant for about 3 years. But it became law when Justice Field, in a subsequent case 3 years later, cited Santa Clara v. Southern Pacific, 1886, as a precedent for corporate personhood. That made it law. But where was Chief Justice Waite? Where was he to protect against this? He was dead and buried. That's where he was, which left the way clear for the unscrupulous Justice Field, backed by 6 other justices, all unscrupulous Santa Clara veterans. They knew what was going on, to declare this phony precedent. A precedent later invoked much more often by corporations seeking constitutional protections than by former slaves seeking constitutional protections. Much more often. And so, again, many years later in our elections, in a case called First National Bank of Boston v. Bellotti, 1978, quite a bit later, which gave corporations the right to participate financially with their money in ballot initiative campaigns. Not campaigns for political offices, not yet. That would come later. Now, in that case, a fellow named Justice Powell wrote the majority opinion. Now, by the way, before his time on the court, this same Mr. Lewis Powell, you may have heard of, wrote a memo for the U.S. Chamber of Commerce urging corporations to join together and finance a campaign against the popular reforms that were being spearheaded then by the likes of Ralph Nader. Some of you may remember his book, Unsafe at Any Speed. Well, Powell and his Chamber of Commerce didn't like that kind of reformation. And one of the justices on that court, Justice Rehnquist, dissented from that opinion. And later he made it clear that he thought it was completely absurd to equate artificial creations with flesh and blood persons in terms of constitutional protections. And he added quite correctly that the question had never been squarely debated in court. And it still hasn't been, really. Even now, it hasn't been yet. But the court finally went all the way in Citizens United in 2010, a few years later, when it allowed dark money in to buy all of our elections, including elections for public office, finally, not just for ballot initiatives. It was wide open then in our elections. The result? You see it around you now. Elections now cost more than ever, and corporations can buy all they want in private. From yard signs and door hangers to every form of social media. Yes, money talks. And thanks to Citizens United, we never know whose money is doing the talking. It's dark. I like to quote a friend of mine named Bill Myers, who wrote the following, quote, "Slavery is the fiction that a person is property. Corporate personhood is the fiction that property is a person." That's from a book of his called, very fittingly, The Santa Clara Blues. But money in politics seems to have no end. Take Indiana. Yes, let's take Indiana for a second, where the typical popular vote is about 55% Republican and 45% Democrat, more or less, pretty much all the time. Now, if we have 9 congressional representatives, now if our 9 congressional representatives broke according to the popular vote I just mentioned, we would have a 5-4 split in the U.S. House of Representatives. But guess what we have year after year after year after year after year? A 7-2 Republican-Democrat split. Does it matter? Does it matter? It can make a huge difference in who controls House chairmanships, for one thing, as we have just seen recently. Made quite a difference, just very recently. And we have a similar break in the Indiana legislature, don't we? It's a break that favors one-party rule and discourages compromise, right? How did we get there? How did we get here? To this land of my way or the highway? Well, a lot of it came from the Republican gerrymandering called red mapping. Red mapping, which started around 2008 and peaked in Indiana in our 2010 redistricting. Red mapping was a nationwide computer-assisted redistricting project. Here comes the money again. That cost the Republican Party about $30 million. And it typically involved packing Democrats and people of color into the smallest possible number of districts allowed by the law. The result? You know what the result was. Democrat candidates henceforth would score a few big wins because they're packed in these small number of districts, and Republican candidates would score lots of modest wins. And in effect, the average Republican's vote carried more electoral weight than the average Democrat's vote. In Indiana, about 3 times as much to be exact. 3 times. So that's why I'm here. At every election, including the coming midterm, I ask myself, how can I help now to recover that democratic ideal where each real person gets just one real vote? That's the ideal. But why are you here? There's a lot of you. I'm very glad to see this. Well, it could be any number of reasons. Maybe you're weary of a state house up in Indianapolis where your representative proudly shows his pistol to some touring high school students in the state house. Maybe you have a representative who strives to turn our public schools into Sunday schools. Maybe you have somebody who tries to make it actually harder to vote instead of easier to vote at every election. Maybe in Washington, you're weary of a president who seems to channel both Emperor Napoleon and the Wizard of Oz. Or maybe you've seen too much of Musk, his gilded puppet master who knows the price of everything and the value of nothing but tax cuts for the rich. Are you really ready to trash your Department of Education, your Social Security, your Medicare, Medicaid, your defense against enemies, foreign or domestic? Well, modern life has given us many good reasons to be here, and I welcome you one and all. Thank you.
We have invited 6 legislators who have constituents in Monroe County. We're very fortunate today to have Senator Shelley Yoder and Representative Matt Pierce. On the other hand, Representative Mayfield and U.S. Representative Houchin, as well as Senate President Rod Bray of Martinsville, were unable to attend. We did not hear anything from Representatives Bob Heaton or Dave Hall. We sincerely believe and hope that they can join us in any future town halls, but don't hold your breath. Since our forum today is limited to education, healthcare, and voting, we have several issue specialists to help us out in these three areas. They are Tracy Hutchins-Getz and Dr. Rob Stone for healthcare, Carrie Mitska for public education, Debbie Asbury and George Hegeman for voting. As they speak, if you have questions about the areas, these three areas they will be addressing, please write your questions on index cards and raise your hands if you want one. We have folks around the room here. Be sure to put the topic at the top of the card, and on the bottom of the card, put your contact information, preferably email. That's in case we don't get to your question, and you will get an answer sooner or later. After you've written your question, please raise your hand, and we'll have people collect the cards from you. Tracy and Rob, we'll get started with you. Yep.
All right. Can you hear me okay? All right, good. So my name's Rob Stone, and I'm a doctor, so you can trust everything that I say. Some of you have heard me talk before, and some of you haven't, but I have been working on healthcare reform in Indiana pretty hard since 2005, and I'm going to not say very much more right now, other than that at the national level, I support Medicare for all, expanding, improving to take care of everybody. And at the state level, I support expanding and protecting Medicaid. And I think Tracy's going to talk a little bit more about the nuts and bolts and worries and fears about Indiana Medicaid, because it's a hugely important issue. But I did want to say one thing about, as we're all here talking together. Sometimes people say, aren't we just preaching to the choir? You could say that maybe about this group. I think there's a lot of really people who are already kind of sold and dedicated and knowledgeable and whatever. But I would say, I would not frame it just preaching to the choir. I would say preaching to the choir is good work if you can get it. Because when you preach to the choir learns how to sing a little better, learns how to understand more of the words, learns how to get their voice out there, and then every once in a while, people from the choir stand right up to the pulpit. So there's nothing wrong with preaching to the choir. So I encourage everybody in the choir today to preach right back to us up at this end of the thing.
Thank you, Rob, and it's really wonderful to be here today with all of y'all. My name is Tracy Hutchins-Getz. I'm the Communications and Policy Director with Hoosier Action. And before I took on this current role, I was our healthcare organizer. And in 2019, many of you in this room, including Rob, and I worked together to successfully defeat the attempt to implement Medicaid work requirements in Indiana. And the bad news is we have to do it again. But the good news is we've done it once, and I know we can. So what I'm going to speak about a little bit is the kind of current state of play at the Indiana General Assembly with bills related to healthcare, health equity, health access, health justice, whatever you want to call it here in Indiana. Hoosier Action is a grassroots, politically independent community organization, and we're really rooted in rural and small town southern Indiana. I am a proud Bloomingtonian. I organize a chapter here of Hoosier Action members, but we have chapters from New Albany on up to Morgan County is really where we're focused. And since the start of our organization, we have been dedicated to protecting and improving Medicaid, which is a vital public health program that is administered by the state and federal government. So the federal chaos that we're currently experiencing is definitely making our work more challenging. But what we believe is that if you start at the level where we have the most power, getting people together who are neighbors in a room and working on up to the state, that is how we will eventually impact federal policy. So we're really focused on the General Assembly, which is currently in session, and in particular have been organizing against a Senate priority bill, SB 2, put forward by Senator Ryan Mishler. And this bill, unfortunately, has now made it through the Senate and is going to be before the House. So SB 2 has been amended. We did score one big victory on that already. Originally, it was going to include a 3-year cap for healthcare coverage under the Healthy Indiana Plan. This would have been a lifetime cap that would have arbitrarily removed low-income folks who rely on HIP from their healthcare coverage once they hit 3 years. So this would have included people with long-term chronic illnesses. This would have included people with cancer. It would have included parents. And because of public pressure, because of the phone calls and the emails of people, in this room and your loved ones. So if you called your Aunt Leanne, who lives in Rockville, and asked her to call her state senator, you had a big impact. But the bill is now before the Senate, and it is still bad news for Hoosiers. So SB 2, oh my gosh, thank you, Rob. It's now before the House. And Senator Yoder can certainly speak to some of the amendments we tried to move in the Senate to further ameliorate the harm of this bill. But SB 2 is now before the House. And it does 3 really bad things. So the first thing that it does, which is pretty dangerous, is it implements new paperwork requirements for all Medicaid members. So that includes folks on Hoosier HealthWise, it includes elderly folks in long-term managed care, and it includes Healthy Indiana Plan members. And these provisions would subject everyone on Medicaid to more frequent eligibility and verification paperwork checks that are going to actually drive up the cost of running the program. So it's going to be more expensive, and it's going to cover fewer people because it's going to kick eligible people off their healthcare coverage. So I don't know about y'all, but I have spent many hours on the phone with insurance companies. I have had medical billing fights. And what this would do is ramp that up to 11 for people who are already struggling to make ends meet and people who are most likely, experiencing some pretty serious health issues, because we know that those diagnoses, things like cancer, coincide with poverty. It makes you sick to be poor, and being poor makes you sicker. So that's the first thing it does, which impacts all Medicaid members. The second 2 main things that it does, which we strongly oppose, pertain specifically to the Healthy Indiana Plan. So HIP covers 1 in 7 people in this state. 750,000 people, which is a heck of a lot of Hoosiers. It's how they get to the doctor. It's how they stay working. And what this would do to HIP is set an arbitrary enrollment cap at 500,000 people. So, yeah. So for those of you who weren't so fast with your math, I know that's me, that's 250,000 people getting disenrolled like that from their health insurance coverage. Because of this bill. And it provides no explanation of how those individuals would be selected, which is pretty terrifying for everyone I know and love on HIP. And then on top of that, it subjects all HIP members to those paperwork requirements I mentioned earlier. These are sometimes referred to as ways to get people back to work, but I will tell you, we know from other states, they don't work. All they do is deny people healthcare coverage and subject them and the state to more and more paperwork. Constant verifications that you are worthy, that you deserve healthcare. And what I know Rob and I both stand for is a deep belief and a deep knowledge that we all have bodies, we all get sick, and everyone should be able to go to the doctor without fear of going bankrupt, period, no exceptions. Thank you. We are going to continue to organize against SB2. There's a bunch of materials in the back of the room at our table about this, and I'm happy to talk to y'all more about what we're going to be doing in the second half of the session. I'll also note, and Senator Yoder was a co-author on this bill, that we were very disappointed just last week to see SB 317 die a very sad death on the Senate floor, which was a bill that would have significantly improved things for Hoosiers with medical debt, and it would have helped prevent more people from falling into medical debt, which is a deep concern that we have if we're looking at coverage loss for hundreds of thousands of Hoosiers on Medicaid.
Okay. Hi, everybody. My name is Carrie Mixa. I am a board member of the Indiana Coalition for Public Education. We are a statewide organization. We were founded in 2011 when voucher legislation took hold in Indiana, and now, 14 years later, and we are sending millions and millions of dollars to private schools. I want to say that our communities are filled with amazing schools, public, private, charter. There's lots of traditions, amazing educators, amazing leaders. But the problem is the funding. There's going to be a lot of talk about money today, I think. It is a budget year. There's only so much, and the fact of that there's only so much, this can break up communities because there's only so many dollars. And at the center of all of our communities are our schools, specifically our public schools. For example, to show you how this money has kind of been dispersed, in 2008, tax dollars went to 2 school districts in Monroe County, RBB and MCCSE. Today, due to choice funding expansion over the years, state tax dollars follow Monroe County school-age children to almost 50 different outside of district schools, including 10 charters and 11 private voucher schools. We're basically unbundling education. You know, I don't know about you, but I can't remember what app that one show I'm watching is on. And that kind of is what it's like when you talk about how education funding works in Indiana. It is very, very complex and confusing. Another interesting thing with this whole money follows the child idea that exists in Indiana, in 2024-25, this school year, Indiana is funding over 44,000 more students than it did in 2009 and 10, but yet we're $323 million behind 2010 funding. But it gets worse when you add those 44,000 kids. If we're trying to do the math of money following the child, it's almost double behind if you factor in the money that way, and that's how they do the math at the State House. So state of play in terms of what's happening at the State House and at the U.S. government, we are trying to dismantle public education, right? It's been in the works for a long time, and it's still in play today. At the State House, our organization is focused on the money bills, which is the budget bill, another bill called Senate Bill 518 that will send property tax dollars, because right now property tax dollars do not go to private schools or privately managed schools, which are charter schools, but with 518, we will be sending property tax dollars to charter schools. So there's we don't have a say in our charter schools here. The authorizers for our charter schools in Monroe County, we have 2 here. The authorizers that say whether or not a school can stay open are located 2+ hours away. One is in Ball State, and the other one is Grace College in Northern Indiana. And then we have another bill that thankfully got a bit weaker, which was 443, which is business personal property tax. But when it started out, that was a significant chunk because we have a lot of businesses in Monroe County, and that would affect, our public schools, in addition to our libraries and our city councils and what have you. A few other things that we're following is like separation of church and state and democracy bills, which includes how school board elections are run. And I'm sure maybe you folks might talk about that a little bit, but they are looking to make it partisan instead of nonpartisan, right? So you have to declare your party before you run. You have to follow more election rules. So it's hard enough to get people to run for school board these days due to the pandemic, due to the frustrations and lack of pay of being a school board member. And it's not just here, it's nationally. That this bill is a tough one to swallow. We have other ones where we're like allowing chaplains to be work in our schools. I don't know, I think that applies to a specific school because I don't know, but it already exists in Texas, and only one school in Texas allows chaplains to come in and be counselors and give spiritual guidance in a public school. We also have a religious education bill, which allows kids to, we have a release time in this state. We are a very religious state. And so for the longest time, in certain schools, you were allowed to leave school to attend religious education. And they keep on expanding the rules on this in terms of, the teachers and the school don't have a say, Tommy really shouldn't go because he's not really doing well in reading. We really need him to stay here and learn. Now the parents have the right to say, no, I want my child to go to religious education. And now they're expanding the time frame to equal an elective course in high school. So your kid will leave even more hours per week in high school so they can claim an elective in religious education outside of school. And then we have our culture war bill, which is a DEI bill, but that one got a little bit softer, thankfully, for in terms of public schools. And we have some watering down code, giving charter schools a little bit more rights, leniency, and the homeschool diploma a little bit more strength. In terms of being recognized as a legit diploma, even though there are no rules or guidelines for a homeschool diploma. Meanwhile, this summer we passed a brand new diploma, or this winter, we passed a brand new diploma in Indiana that's supposed to be way stronger and cost a lot more money. So with that, that's just where we're at right now, state of play in the state. Thank you.
George and Debbie.
Hi, I'm a retired professor of microbiology from IU, and so I have a certain sentimental connection to the welfare of students. And I'm also on the board, or the leadership team of the League of Women Voters, which you may know functions to do the legislative updates and candidate forums and other kinds of voter education as a good government organization, sort of like several others that are active in the area. What Jim said about red maps is certainly true. The legislature is now thoroughly gerrymandered to the extent that what is being done to ensure the retention of incumbents is mostly voter suppression. By suppressing the votes of those who would not favor the particular incumbents, the activities of the legislature often bend toward doing something that shortens the voting period, reduces ability to get proper voting IDs, things of that sort. We no longer have poll taxes and things of that sort, but this is the new trickery. What we have this session of the General Assembly, the state legislature, is a collection of bills that affect voting and the ability to actually do what you want to do on election day. And that is listed in a very elaborate and careful way, together with recommendations on the State League of Women Voters of Indiana website. And I invite you to have a look at the things that are shown there. Mostly it is a menu of different kinds of things that reduce the ability of the voter to express their will. But on the other hand, there are two very good things that happened very recently. I got an email at 8 a.m. today from Julia Vaughn and Common Cause saying that State Bill 284, which had to do with the voting period, reducing it from 30 days to 14, is dead. And so is Senate Bill 201, which would have closed primaries so that third-party candidates and those who want to jump parties and so on would not be able to vote. So those are two good things that have happened recently. But we still face a number of difficulties in the way of bills that are pending, like SB 10, the Senate Bill 10, which invalidates state-issued student IDs. Student and other IDs necessary to identify yourself for voting purposes must include a photo. There must be a date of expiration, and it must be from a government agency. And with those things fulfilled, you can walk in and register or go to vote. Students will no longer be able to do this according to SB 210 if it succeeds. SB 210 also wants to shorten the voting period of voters to and disable voters who have not voted in the previous two elections. So it's got a couple of parts. But the issue is that students from out of state who may want to register and vote in Indiana, or Indiana residents who are from elsewhere, not locally, would be in big trouble because of SB 10. And therefore, we're opposing that strongly, together with a number of other bills, and I won't list them. It's a litany, and they're pretty much self-explanatory. They range from abolishing elected township assessors to forcing candidate selection criteria to be subject to caucus approval, new restrictions on voters requiring undated absentee ballots to be automatically rejected, and giving new powers over the elections to the Secretary of State, among others. So that's a lot to be worked on, and the League has recommendations. It's a nonpartisan organization, but in a ponderous process of study and voting by the membership, it arrives at positions which are then the basis for litigation, advocacy, and other kinds of activities by the League.
George. I'll have to ask you later. My son graduated from IU in biology, and you may have been one of his esteemed teachers, so this is very cool. There's a couple other bills that are progressing through the House that you might want to be aware of. Senate Bill 137 is 50% through the House process, so it has a high likelihood of, continuing. And that is not as egregious as some of the more broad voter suppression, but it unfairly impacts naturalized citizens, where the Bureau of Motor Vehicle can sort of red tag was like, well, this person only has a temporary green card, and so you might want to keep your eye on this person, right? And so it's Senate Bill 137. So that is one to be cautious of, and if you're going down to testify, that would be one that we would suggest that you oppose. And House Bill 1680 is, again, it allows citizens to perhaps say maybe this person isn't a naturalized citizen or isn't it a citizen. It can sort of raise a red flag that could maybe make it harder for people to vote. They'd have to show proof of citizenship. And it also seriously limits the degree to which you can help an elderly voter get registered. There used to be ways in which you could help that person get registered, or disabled folks get registered. This limits that. So that's House Bill 1680. And then the other thing, it's red mapping, it's voter suppression, it is just continuing death by 1,000 cuts. The problem, and I love that, Rob, you're preaching to the choir. The problem is, dear choir, is that we understand this, but we are in a minority of people who pay attention to these things until a week and a half before election. And then at that point, we're listening to our favorite podcast to figure out who we should vote for when we get into the voting booth, right? So a part of the work, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, is how we can minimize the negative impact of information deserts. And my friends, you are the answer to that. And we know you need tools for that and ways to understand that, but you have to understand and be able to tell it to someone else like they're a 6-year-old, not because they are a 6-year-old, but because they have got broken cars and poor health and they're about to be kicked out of their health insurance. They have 1,000 other things to think about. And so a part of the work of preaching to the choir is empowering the choir to be informed of these things and then to help spread that news to your friends, neighbors, churches, and communities. So thank you.
Thank you very much to our panel of experts here. Senator Yoder has a limited time with us this afternoon, so I would like to give her this opportunity to say what's on her mind.
Well, thank you for being here. We don't get to be preaching to the choir very often, so it's really great to be here and to hear from you. We need to hear from you. And there are the big heavy hitter bills that everyone's talking about. And then there are those bills that you read and you think, I haven't heard anything about this bill, and this is terrible. Am I reading this right? So thank you. Thank you for making sure you're here and letting us hear from you. It's been quite a whirlwind for a long session. And it feels like it could have been 6 months when really it's been 6 weeks. And what we've been able to pack into those 6 weeks and the damage that can be done for the state of Indiana is pretty significant. Some notes here when it comes to education. I learned some things actually over the last couple of weeks, and I realized this isn't about public school versus charter schools. And it's easy to get into that trap because ultimately this is about privatization of the whole system. And when we are having the conversation about sharing property taxes with charter schools, I think what gets lost in that conversation is the fact that we are going to cap property taxes and then share more funding of property taxes among more schools, tying the hands of our public schools and also the charter schools to not be able to make ends meet. And then it's going to be a lot easier and a lot harder for our school boards to not take money from private entities because there's not enough money to do what we have to do to educate our children. And that's what's happening here is this move, this race to privatization. And we can say we are, when it comes to the choice vouchers and the private school funding in the state of Indiana, we can say we are about to go to universal vouchers, but we're pretty much there. But we are about to be the first state to be there. And so this blazing a trail to privatization is absolutely the direction that we need to ask our elected officials, is that the end game? Because the argument asking the question, do you not realize what you're doing to public schools? That is assuming there is a value shared in public education. And I think that is false. And that is a question we need to be asking. What is the end goal here? Is the end goal privatization, which I think we are seeing every sign pointing to yes. So that is very, very concerning. And I would say that's a message that Hoosiers might not like. So I wanted to just mention that. Senate Bill 2, thank you so much, Tracy. Tracy has been incredibly helpful, and Hoosier Action has been incredibly helpful in helping us reach our members, as well as in messaging and in understanding the impact of these bills. So Senate Bill 2, as Tracy very effectively educated us all on, is going to double down on something that other states have tried and have learned it doesn't save the state money, and that is putting in this work element, this work component. It ends up costing the state more money to administer, to track down, and we'll have more Hoosiers looking to emergency and urgent care as their primary care, which is going to then push our healthcare expenses up and increase Hoosiers' healthcare costs even more. And here we have some of the best healthcare systems in the world, actually in Indiana, but our health outcomes near the bottom and our costs are near the top. So Senate Bill 2 is not going to help that dilemma whatsoever. So continue your work against Senate Bill 2 as it moves over to the House. Senate Bill 1, in the effort to provide relief for homeowners in Indiana, the Senate did amend it to be less of a real, I don't even know what the word is. It is going, the original bill as filed would hurt just MCCSC $10 million. In 1 year. And so it left the Senate less harmful, but we are hearing from the governor and from the House that they want to take it back closer to the original. $10 million in 1 year. So that's just Senate Bill 1. Senate Bill 518, which will require private public schools to share property taxes with charter schools, that's additional money being siphoned away from public schools and funding charter schools. So the reckless nature in which these two bills are moving through and the lack of information that we have been given as legislators from the Legislative Service Agency is reckless. I don't even know a better word. It is just fiscally reckless that we are moving these bills through and we do not know where either of them are to make an informed decision, and leaving Hoosiers panicked and desperate. That is where we are with those two bills. We have had a few successes. There is a handout. You can see some of the successes that the Democratic caucus has had in the Senate. But I want to tell you a little story about Senate Bill 317, which was a medical debt bill that was going to, when it was filed, actually have some really good options for Hoosiers when it comes to medical debt. It got amended in health, and it was voted unanimously out of health. It was amended to at least require all healthcare systems in Indiana to provide information on charity care and to let every Hoosier know that what is your situation and how can we help you create a healthcare plan. Basically, that's what the bill ended up doing. The reason why it did not pass is because we were told we were taking too much time at the microphone, the Senate Democratic members. And it upset them because we were debating too long on bills like 518 the day before when we had filed like 27 amendments. And as a little bit of a know your place, we're going to defeat this bill and harm Hoosiers. Because that's really what 317, the defeat of 317 was, to sort of teach us a lesson, but ultimately harm Hoosiers. And that is really anti-democratic. It's not even about party. That is just harming Hoosiers from the get-go. Let's see here. I will be quiet now because I really want to take your questions. And I am here till 5. I just have to scoot at 5. So that's the only thing. And it's the fun part when you get to chit-chat afterward. But I'll be quiet now because I want to hear your question.
Do we have all the questions you people have? Raise your hand and we'll get those collected. I have a question concerning education. Do charter schools get their funding before public schools if money is short?
That's a very complicated question. No, I don't believe they do. They just they're following the budget in terms of, that's the estimated amount. But then when you look at what actually happened when they do their annual report at the end, I don't believe that, they would get it first. No. Yeah, please add to that.
I just want to let everyone here give a little bit of insight. That's a Senate Bill. Well, it's actually the budget in Senate Bill 518. This is the conversation that isn't being had. So what 518 is doing, what is coming out of the budget, we are actually going to defund charter schools. That charter school grant money is going to come down, and that charter school funding is going to be shifted to property taxes. So that's why I said this is not about, basically, if you want to say this is public schools against charter schools, because we've been thrown scraps at this point. When we are having a conversation with Senate Bill 1 about capping property taxes and then shifting more funding to K through 12 education to property taxes, and more schools having to be funded through those dollars. That's why the conversation is really about privatization, because it's not that this is more money to charters. It's your property taxes are going to go to making up that difference. So that is what's happening with 518 and what's happening with Senate Bill 1001. I'm sorry, House Bill 1001 with funding of K through 12 education. That is not even the question, because I know the question was about funding charter schools first. It's not funding them first. It is pushing the funding of charter schools to property taxes, which is why that argument that we keep hearing in Indiana, the money follows the child. Actually, that's not true, because not every child is coming from a home paying property taxes. So that is why this argument begins to break down. So I urge you to continue fighting against Senate Bill 518.
Well, apologies to Representative Matt Pierce. I thought we were going to be limited with time for Shelley. So Matt, you have an opportunity to talk now. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I will try to be brief because I think it is important to get to the questions. I just want to talk about 3 bills that I think kind of just highlight exactly what's happening with this General Assembly. And the first is, if you look at the budget bill, so that's passed out of the House now, and it's going to be taken up by the Senate in the second half. And in that budget, they didn't do anything to solve the Medicaid shortfall, really. They just rationed care, basically. It's the way they approached it. And they also, at the same time, they're saying we don't really have money to deal with the healthcare stuff, and we don't have money to provide people that need good quality early childhood education, good child care. We don't have the money for that. But we've got $180 million that we can give to the wealthiest Hoosiers to pay for their kids to go to private schools, which accomplishes absolutely nothing, because those parents are already wealthy enough to easily afford to pay for that private education. And now we're going to subsidize it for them, which doesn't improve the quality of education for a single child in the state. It just maintains the status quo with the wealthiest people being subsidized. $180 million. Imagine if we put the $180 million in the early childhood education for the poorest people who can't afford it. And at the same time that they're telling us that, gee, sorry, we don't have the money. It's a really shame that it's a tight budget year. This is the thing that really infuriates me, because they do not have the courage to stand up and say, we don't really want to fund our public schools, or we don't really care about early childhood education, because they know that that might cause them a problem, because people want that. They need those things. So instead they say, oh, gee, I'd love to do it, but I just don't have the money. At the same time, they continue to cut the income tax. So it was at 3.4% at one point. It'll be down to 2.95%. And because it's a flat tax, for the poorest Hoosiers, that 0.05% cut or whatever it is coming up will not even be noticed, won't be noticed. But if you're a multimillionaire, you're going to, that's some change. That's some money. And so they're deliberately starving the government in order to have the excuse for why they can't provide the services to the people of the state that they need. And so that kind of tells you something. At the same time that's happening, a couple other bills I think also kind of illustrate where the priorities are. So House Bill 1079 deals with when a landlord can sell the property of evicted tenants. Under current law, if you evict somebody and their property is still in the rental unit, you have to keep it in storage for 90 days and give that tenant that period of time to be able to reclaim their belongings. And if they don't claim them after 90 days, then you can sell them at an auction or something, or throw them in a dumpster, I guess. Well, we passed a bill in the House that will move that from 90 days to 30 days. Because they said, well, 90 days is really high compared to other states. We have to lower it. So people who are facing eviction are now going to be under the gun to have 30 days to figure out where they're going to live and get their property back. So then we have House Bill 1174, which I call payday lender bill. They argue there's some difference between payday lenders, what it's doing, but they are increasing the interest rate to 36% now for these predatory lenders. Now it gets even better because they're also going to allow the lenders to add monthly fees to the loan based on the size of the loan. It kind of stair steps up. And so during debate, the author of the bill was asked, well, if you add in the fees and the interest rate, what's the effective interest rate of the loan? What's the highest effective interest rate? And he got out his little sheet of paper and he went down and he said, yeah, I checked that out. It looks like the highest interest rate amount would be 149%. 149%. Now, I'll hand it to my colleagues on the other side of the aisle. That bill needed 51 votes to pass. It got 52. So there was a little bit of pause there. But it shows you where are the priorities? Who is being served? Now, here's our problem. Those people getting evicted, people who are in the low end of the socioeconomic scale, they've given up on us. They're not voting. They're not paying attention. Like, I got to survive. I don't have time for these politicians who never seem to help me, no matter what I do. They've checked out. So the people who serve those who are the wealthiest, those who are the privileged, those who are at the upper end of things, those who have the influence, they can serve their needs all they want and not have to worry about being held accountable for it, because the people hurt most by that probably won't even know who hurt them. And we could get into another big discussion about the media and how you find out what's going on and social media and all that. Now, just to close this up, so with that kind of dichotomy of action, we then have House Bill 1008, sponsored by the Speaker of the House. 1008, which passed the House, will create a border commission to investigate annexing disgruntled Republican downstate counties from Illinois to the state of Indiana. And the Speaker, during the debate, said, yeah, it's kind of a long shot, but it does give us an opportunity to talk about how great our state is, how our regulations are low, our taxes are low. We are a conservative nirvana of balanced budgets. And this is our opportunity to highlight that. And it really showed that people are not even recognizing the problems that people are facing in their daily lives. You can just see that straight up. And something has got to be done to try to change that approach to things. And the budget is the classic example. The budget writers in the majority are not sitting down and saying like, wow, how are we going to serve the needs of the people? We got limited money. How are we going to maximize serving the needs of the people? What are we going to need to do? That's not how it starts. It's all about, man, that Medicaid's getting expensive. We got to cut that back. We got to get that down to this number. It's all bottom line numbers on a page. It is not people. No one is thinking about the people behind the numbers. It's just all about, we got to get to this number. We got to get this Medicaid back in the box. So we got to cut it back, wait lists. Let's do some stuff to reduce the rolls. And until the people who are going to be harmed most by those policies understand who has harmed them and get involved in the political process, it's going to be more of the same. So that's my big message. We've got to get people engaged again to understand who is on their side and who is not, and get them to be part of the political process once again.
We have a ton of questions here, so I would ask that the responses be as short as possible. Here's one for healthcare and Senate Bill 2. How do they plan on purging 200,000 Hoosiers off Medicare HIP? And why does Indiana not use the $1 billion surplus to fund Medicaid?
Two great questions there. So to get into the technical process of purging those folks, they have said that they are going to require some federal permission through the Medicaid waiver process in order to be able to do this first. So there, will be some implementation questions, but it really, remains unclear. For instance, how we would select that, right? Would it be like the last people enrolled? Would it be the oldest people on the program? Would it be all the Pisces? I don't know. They really don't say. This is why I think it's probably the part of the bill we're going to be most likely to hack off. And so that's my hope, is to kill it with some amendments in the House. And then the other question concerning the budget surplus, because of our work, like everyone in this room, whether you work at home, you're a stay-at-home mom, or whether you work at the library or you work at Cook, like all of us pay into our government to make it work. And our contributions fund Medicaid, which is a public good, right? And so the problem that is happening, and I think Rep. Pierce did a really good job of outlining this, is the state is making decisions about how to redistribute those funds. And Medicaid is an extremely efficient program in our state. It's an incredible return on investment that is mostly paid for by the federal government. So to pull those funds out of the state to defund Medicaid is very poor fiscal planning, in addition to being incredibly cruel, because we do have enough to take care of all of our people in this state, period, especially those struggling the most.
The next two questions concern voting rights. Can you please talk about the SAVE Act, which would make it more difficult for married women and disabled and the elderly to register to vote? And also, Indiana also has one of the most restrictive voter laws in the nation, but now we want to disallow students to use their university ID to vote. Has there been any evidence provided that a student ID is less secure than a driver's license, state ID, or passport?
I'll answer the last one first. No. But we don't base our decisions on empirical data, right? We base our decisions on the kinds of questions that Matt outlined for us and others have outlined for us. All right, the SAVE Act is a federal act. It's a hypocritical name. It's Save Americans Voter Integrity or something. It basically is disenfranchising of voters. You can get all the information on the SAVE Act from the Indivisible National Group. Just Google Indivisible, and there's some good data there. The good news is, well, good news, bad news. It passed the House in 2024, but for some reason it's beyond my understanding. It's going to go back to the House again next week, according to Ezra Levin and Leah, the two folks who are doing all this good work. It will pass out of the House because of just the numbers that are in the House, right? It'll pass by the Senate majority. But there have been some Democrats who have been trying to be bipartisan and try to play nice, thinking that if they play nice, the other guy will play nice, which doesn't work. And so, but none of those folks are in Indiana. So Indivisible is having the folks who did do that to call those Democrats to say, could you please figure the game out and vote no on SAVE? But it will still pass the House. But when it goes to the Senate, there's not enough votes in the Senate to get past the filibuster. So if not one Democrat sides on this vote, and so that is where we need to, when it goes to the Senate, it's where we need to really put pressure on the Democrats, which are supposedly the good guys, to say, just sit down and keep your hand down, right? So it requires proof of citizenship. And so it's egregious. It will just make it harder. And again, by the time the people who get hurt the most figure out who hurt them, it's going to be too late, right? So keep your eyes on the SAVE Act as it progresses through the House and then moves towards the Senate. And if I forgot anything, someone else can answer that.
Education. We have a lot of questions that we're not going to get to today, so we'll try our best. Why is there so little oversight of taxpayer money going to private schools? Why are there different rules and regulations?
Because the money follows the child. It's strictly because it's a private school. We have not had the drive at the State House to develop many guardrails to figure out what is happening with that money when it reaches a private school, what is being taught in those private schools. The only thing we know is their testing scores, and of course they do well because they can be very selective.
Okay. Healthcare. What is Congress's plan to fight abortion ban and educate folks to their grim realities?
Let me, this said Congress, but I think we're talking about the state,
Yes.
right? So I'm going to lateral this to Shelley, who knows as much about what's being done to protect abortion rights, what little we have left. Other than that, it looks like the bill that was going to require every abortion in Indiana to generate a public record of that abortion, allegedly anonymized, but potentially could be traced back to the woman who had the abortion. I think that bill looks like it's dead.
Well, we still have the executive order requiring that all terminated pregnancy reports be made public and be made available. So you still have that. And we were able to defeat, well, it didn't get out, I don't think it got out of the House, Senate Bill 1169, the one that tried to be an education bill, but refused to include condoms as contraceptives and any IUDs, and subdermal implants as I think that as birth control. I think it was defining birth control, plus prohibiting our local health departments from providing sex education if our parents and our school boards would allow it in our school systems. It prohibited that too. I think that died. So that's good. It's a small win. But we still have seen extreme bills filed, and they will continue to be filed. They just didn't get a hearing this time. I think in that space, we do have some tired Republicans. So keep up the good work. Yes. I continue to file the repeal of Senate Bill 2 to at least get us back to where we were pre-summer of 2022 to make abortion care accessible to Hoosiers, and I will continue working to that end and for that right until we do repeal that bill. So I don't know what else to say, but I don't think we've seen the end of it, and we have to continue going in that direction. We did pass out of the Senate the requirement for the posting of the human sexuality instruction on a conspicuous place on a school's website so community members can see what's being taught and chime in to their school board. So we already have there has to be parental consent to, well, first there has to be a school board that votes on what any kind of sexual education instruction there will be. It has to be approved by the Indiana State Board of Education, and now it's going to be available on the website. So there's just all kinds of red tape bureaucracy happening around the space of human sexuality and teaching grades 3 through 12 of that education. So we've got work to do.
Let me just add that the leadership in the General Assembly, they poll and focus group everything. They've got everything analyzed out. And I think they recognize that the abortion ban is not really very popular. So it's in there. They want to get it in the rearview mirror and keep it there. And so they don't really want to get back into that issue again. But they have a core group of people in the General Assembly who think that bill is too lax. It's not strict enough. And in fact, it was interesting because during the first half of the session, I looked out my window of the State House by my desk, and I noticed there was a large anti-abortion protest. And all the signs, you read the signs, you would not have known that Roe v. Wade had been overturned and that, in fact, a very strict abortion ban had been passed in our state. I mean, it was like a time warp. So you're going to constantly have people pushing and saying until there is absolutely zero exceptions. And then we also get into the forms of birth control that they feel are abortifacients, because that's what's going on in the background there. There's certain birth control, maybe most, that they feel is also basically an abortion. And so those have to be stopped as well. And so you're going to begin to have that push. And then you got the polling and focus group people saying, maybe we don't want to go there.
In order to get to the last section of our meeting today, which is taking action, I have one more question, and this is addressed to our legislators. According to budget documents and the Nonpartisan Legislative Services Agency, half the school funding increase proposal for next year will go to pay private school tuition for the state's wealthiest families. That will benefit fewer than 1% of Hoosier students. What can we do to make this information more available to voters?
I mean, yes, I hear Charlotte Zietlow saying call to action. We do have call to action, but we have to be talking about this in terms of why are we funding private schools? Why is the state of Indiana funding private schools? Because the last I knew, we had 90% of Hoosier parents send their kiddos to public schools. So why are we increasing dollars and spending, or the 180 million increase? Why are we sending that to private schools? Why are we fleecing you and your schools to fund private schools? What can we do? I think just keep reaching out, call to action, don't ease up, because as we know, we are moving towards full privatization of education in the state of Indiana. Before we move, I want to say something about 1008. 1008, I know we were chuckling, but it is a slap in the face. It is a slap in the face to Hoosiers because it is the Indiana Republican State House officials, those who refuse to give Hoosiers ballot measures, but are now saying we are going to listen to Illinois ballot measure voters. And that's why this bill is so outrageous, because the author of the bill said, we want to let Illinois know we hear you, we see you, and we want you to feel heard. That is, for some Hoosiers, pretty touchy-feely, but for all Hoosiers, pretty offensive. Because we don't get a ballot measure. Why should we be spending our time listening to Illinois voters who did get one? It's offensive, and we need to let Indiana State House Republicans know that.
Let me just pile on for a second on that point as well. You can go look at it in the archives, but Representative Reagan Hatcher of Gary gave the most awesome speech, essentially saying, as a resident of Gary, I know what it's like to be ignored by your legislature. I know what it's like to have people make decisions about me in which they do not ask me as the elected representative what the decision should be. And so just go back and watch that speech. She just did an awesome job of kind of dismantling this whole idea, because it is kind of funny. It's like these poor downstate Illinois Republicans have been so abused by the Democrats of Chicago that we have to save them. And I'm just thinking, like, well, how many times have you abused Bloomington in the last 10 years, Mr. Legislature?
Okay, at this point, we have some comments on historical perspective from Lois Sable-Skelton.
I know. I'm short, but you're gonna hear what I say. I got my Social Security card, my Social Security check this month. It was late. Pretty soon, I'm not going to be getting it. And I know it. How many of you have gotten your checks? They're getting later and later. I want to take just a few minutes I want you to consider some points of history that we have to think about because it's happening today. Jim gave you a little bit of history, but he didn't go back far enough. And I'm going to go back far enough, and I want you to take these points because they're going to help you fight what's happening to us today. In 1932, in July, the Nazis became the second largest political party. They were called the National Socialist German Workers' Party. Sounds pretty good, right? Well, by 1933 in January, Hitler became chancellor. And then things happened really fast. In 1933 February, the Reichstag was burned. In 1933 March 12th, the first concentration camp outside Berlin. March 22, the Dachau concentration camp opened. March 23, the Enabling Act. And April 1st, Nazi boycott Jewish shops. May 1933, book burning in Berlin and all over Germany. Oh, they're after our books. You all know that. July 1933, the Nazi Party declared themselves the only political party. Well, today, we seem to have only one political party. And they are in charge. And that is why what's happening at the federal level and happening at the state level is happening. We are under siege. And finally, just a short, less than a year later, in August 1934, Hitler becomes the Fuhrer. We're not going to let this happen. And that's really why you're here today. We are under siege. We are under siege. We have got to start gathering like we are doing here. You've got to start going out and emailing, writing, calling. At least try this. You know, if I'm busy, what can I do? Michelle is going to tell you what to do in just a moment. But I want to tell you what I've put down for myself. I've got a list of everybody, not just at our state level, but I've got a list of all of them at the federal level. And every week I'm going to take an hour or two and I'm going to start calling them all. What would it be if we all started calling them all? Take that 2 hours during your week, have it all lined up. Just sit there with your phone, call them, send your emails, write your letters, and keep it going at least for the next year. We've got to keep it going. They've been working on this for a long time. Anybody who knows their history, and I really didn't know this, I didn't know it went back that far. It was in the 1920s, I think, that Nazi plan, they called it the 2025 points. Go to Wikipedia. It's there. That's where this idea came from. You're talking about those 2025 points of the present administration? That's where they got it from. We are not going to let this happen. Make a plan for yourself. Be active, be active, be active. Thank you. And now Michelle is going to carry on.
Hi, everyone. My name's Michelle Higgs. I'm a former candidate for House District 60, which covered parts of Monroe, Morgan, and Johnson counties. I'm also the founder of the Indiana Rural Summit, a coalition that brings gerrymandered districts like mine together to give rural and small town voters a voice. The other day, I came across a TED Talk called The Success of Nonviolent Civil Resistance by Erica Chenoweth, a political scientist at Harvard University. She describes how she came to understand the sustaining, transformative power of nonviolent movements. I found her discussion deeply encouraging. As our daily news cycles become increasingly violent in tone and nature, so much of the frenetic energy around me feels like it is coming from a profoundly anxious place. Like our bodies know the moment we are in, and we feel we must do something, be somewhere, affect change somehow. It's what I call the everything, everywhere, all at once exhaustion. And if I'm being honest, it feels very disempowering. So that is why I leaned in when Erica Chenoweth said that her studies showed that just 3.5% of any given population committed to sustained nonviolent participation became transformative. So much so that she calls it the 3.5% rule. According to a BBC interview, Chenoweth argues that nonviolent campaigns are more likely to succeed because they can recruit many more participants from a much broader demographic. Nonviolent protest seems to be the best way to get that widespread support. She explains, numbers really matter for building power in ways that can really pose a serious challenge to entrenched authorities. There weren't any campaigns that had failed after they had achieved 3.5% participation. If indeed movements that have mobilized 3.5% of their population in sustained, nonviolent, active participation achieve their aims, then this transformative vision gives me a renewed imagination for change. I was curious, what does 3.5% look like in Monroe County? Based on the 2020 census data calculating for the adult population aged 18 and over, I decided to check out some numbers. For example, here are the calculations for Monroe, Morgan, Lawrence, Greene, and Owen counties. 3.5% in Monroe would be 4,118 individuals. Morgan County would be 1,920. Lawrence County would be 1,243 people. Greene County would be 843. Owen County would be 599. Stop for a minute and think. Those of you from Monroe County, that's less than 4,200 people to organize. Or 420 folks organizing 10 people each. Can we find 420 people ready to mobilize for change? How about Morgan County? Less than 2,000 people will be transformative there. That's 200 people bringing in 10 people each. Let's look at our neighborhoods and calculate outreach accordingly. I chose other rural communities not in my district to highlight the impact Indiana Rural Summit can have if we connect with county leaders. Owen County only needs 60 people with their 10-person lists. And by the way, Spencer Pride has already begun this transformative work. On your handout, there is a section where you can build your own 3.5% network. It's in their insert. There are 7 categories. By adding just 2 contacts for each category, you have reached 14 people, more than the 10 needed. We can do this. In closing, this is February, the month we honor and celebrate Black history. I want us to remember the courage of the people following Martin Luther King Jr. There are 8 principles that influenced MLK Jr.'s Poor People's Campaign and legacy, which he got from Gandhi's transformative work in India dismantling oppressive systems. Quoting Mahatma Gandhi, "Whatever is done for me, but not done with me, is done to me." We're listening to issues that are continually done for us, but not with us. So it feels like it's being done to us, doesn't it? It feels right that we center these transformative principles that in English are called truth force. As I share them, I want us to reflect on how they might guide and inform our own work. Number 1, nonviolence. Nonviolence is not just avoiding physical harm, but also refraining from hatred, anger, and harmful thoughts. It is an active force for love and truth. Number 2, truth. Truth is the ultimate guiding principle. Seeking and standing by truth requires honesty, integrity, and openness to self-correction. 3, self-suffering. Willingness to endure suffering rather than inflict it on others is a powerful way to awaken moral consciousness in both the oppressor and the oppressed. Number 4, self-discipline and control. Nonviolence requires self-discipline in thoughts, words, and actions, including control over desires and material attachments. 5, fearlessness. True nonviolence requires courage. One must not fear persecution, suffering, or even death in the pursuit of justice. Welfare for all. The goal is the upliftment of all people, not just one group or one nation. This includes economic and social justice. Number 7, self-reliance. Relying on one's own resources and promoting local economies prevents exploitation and dependency, aligning with nonviolent resistance. And last, trusteeship. Wealth and power should be held in trust for the well-being of society rather than for personal gain. Now we will transition to taking action and next steps. Let's imagine building our 3.5% and taking action together. I'd like to invite Tracy Hutchings-Getz, Rob Stone, Carrie Mixa, Debbie Asbury, and Susan Davis, who's walking away. She'll be right back, to lead us in this next section. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Michelle. I'll try to just name a couple of things pretty briefly. So to create the change that I think all of y'all want to have in this room and why you came here today, it's going to take both short-term and long-term work. So in the short term, if you're interested in pushing back against SB2, I urge you to go to HoosierAction.org/stop SB2 on our website, and you can find calls to action there, and we'll be organizing events locally. In the long term, it's exactly what Michelle outlined. We need to build deeper and denser relational networks, and I urge all of y'all, if you're not in an organization, whether it's Hoosier Action or something else, find one. Because that is what creates change. It's people coming together across their differences toward a common cause. So find a home, bring people in, and do that like slow, deep work of sustaining relationship. Hoosier Action's next Monroe County chapter meeting is March 16th. It's going to be in Ellettsville this month at the public library. And you can find the registration link for that at hoosieraction.org/events.
I think I'll stand up. My wife Karen is in the back there. When I raise your hand up, Karen. So our group used to be called Hoosiers for a Common Sense Health Plan, and now we call ourselves Medicare for All Indiana. Obviously, I'm a doctor, and our focus is healthcare. But when you listen to all we've been talking about today, people getting evicted. What's the number one reason people get evicted? Probably healthcare bills and illness related. Education obviously ties into all of this. So it's easy to despair. It's really easy to just feel overwhelmed, drained. And the antidote to that feeling is action and activism and coming together. I'm going to read a little bit from 2 sentences from J.D. Pritzker, who is the governor of Illinois, who said this, I think, 2 days ago. Tyranny requires your fear and your silence and your compliance. Democracy requires your courage. So gather your justice and humanity and do not let the tragic spirit of despair overcome us when our country needs us the most. So my final words go to what's called the Serenity Prayer, very important to 12-step groups and all sorts of other ways that people get together. Grant us the courage to change the things we can't. Grant us the serenity to accept the things we cannot change, the courage to change the things we can, and the wisdom to know the difference. It's courage which we get by being together and supporting each other. That's what's going to carry us forward through these tough times.
Okay, in terms of what you can do in regards to advocacy for public education, we have Indiana Coalition for Public Education, Indiana Coalition for Public Ed.org is our website. On the front page are some things that are happening now. You can track bills. You can contact your legislators. We also have a list of third house meetings and maps to where they are to find some of the guests that weren't able to make it here today. So you can show up and talk to them. Aaron Houchin will be in Ellettsville April 5th, I believe. You can register. It's a pay-to-play kind of event, but you can figure out how to go there and ask her hard questions about, please don't support the ECA bill, which is a federal voucher program that benefits only the wealthy. Please be sure to fund special education if the Department of Ed ceases to exist. Please continue to fund Title I if the Department of Education ceases to exist. So the third house meetings are very important. This is an example. Town halls, I think, would fall under the umbrella of third house meetings. Sometimes they're coffee shop meetings. Sometimes they are called Cracker Barrels, but that's where you can find your people. And we have a map and a list on the main page of our website. And then on Thursday, February 27th, which is this week, we will have a Zoom meeting where we will dive in deeper on these education bills in regards to next steps. 1001 is a smoke and mirrors kind of bill. We only touched on the 180, but there are other costs that have been rolled in to make it look like we're gaining more money than we really are for our public schools. But I also ask you, we are grassroots. We are membership supported. We are the David versus the Goliath. We have no money. So we really rely on our donors, our members, our normal people to join us. Membership information is on our website, and that helps fund things we do across the state and pays for a lobbyist at the State House. Thank you so much.
So one call to action immediately is the boycott that Hoosiers for Democracy talked about in our Substack yesterday. Hoosiers for Democracy is an alternative form of advocacy where we can actually name the bad guys if they happen to be a party. And we help educate voters so that they understand what's at stake, understand who has hurt them. So it's really easy to find us. All you have to do is Google Hoosiers for Democracy, and we pop up immediately, and just subscribe. The reason we ask you to subscribe, we know our audience are you. We made that strategic decision a year ago when we launched it. We knew we were speaking to the choir. We talked with Hoosier Action, and they had read a couple of our emails, and they said, you're not talking to our folks, right? And so we made a decision. What we want to do is speak to the choir so you can do what Michelle talked about. It's relational advocacy. And that is the key to fighting against the oppressor and not repeating the history lesson of the 1932 and 1933 lesson that we learned today, because we are there. So there's a boycott on Friday, an economic boycott. Money talks. And can you imagine no Amazon orders? Can you imagine not going no buying unless it's absolutely essential? So that the body politic of the people who have all the money understand that we have power too, and we have economic power. So there is a boycott on Friday. It starts midnight the 27th and it goes to midnight the 28th. The second call to action, and this is where it's alternative advocacy. It's after the reckless bills get passed in this God-forsaken General Assembly, despite the good, hard work that we have with the people sitting there and here, we have calls to action afterwards to help people understand what the hell just happened. And one of the things that Hoosiers for Democracy is beginning to understand, because of my background, I think, in systems theory, we do not have a structure to hold the energy. It's dissipated, right? We are fractured and siloed. And so one of the things I'm going to be talking to Michelle about tomorrow, and Shelley tomorrow, and other people tomorrow at another event, is what would it look like if we created an evolving, self-organizing network of activists who could engage in relational activism now for the next year, not now until April 29th when the General Assembly ends, because they go home and we are exhausted and then we live with the consequences. So we need to move in a way that holds this energy, not build another structure, evolving, organic, self-organizing network of these amazing activists that exist across this country, the state. And I think we can do that. We've got enough smart people sitting up here and out there to do that. So that's the second call to action. First one, Hoosiers for Democracy, subscribe, and then don't buy anything next Friday.
Thank you. I'm Susan Davis, and I've been on the steering committee for Reverse Citizens United since about 2014. I was drawn to the group because so many of the things I valued,
Felt like they were being eroded right in front of my eyes. And the 2010 decision by the Supreme Court of the United States decision in Citizens United versus the Federal Elections Commission is why. In a 5-4 ruling, the court had overturned key campaign finance rules and cases for the very first time. They said corporations have, I love this part, a First Amendment right to spend unlimited amounts of money for or against a political candidate. 14 years of that much money in our politics is the reason we're all sitting here today. Our metaphorical mascot is Octi. And if you look closely at the political drawing by the former HT cartoonist Joe Lee, you will see that instead of eyebrows, he's written corporate person. And the money tentacles are busy reaching into education and healthcare and voting, labor, politics, government, media, environment. We don't think that money should dominate the public discourse. And that's why our recent campaign of Follow the Money focused on how some of our legislators with constituencies in Monroe County were voting and funded for the 2 years leading up to the 2024 election. Those alerts were shared with our listserv and are still on our website. This fall, we were part of the pushback on the Duke Energy rate hike proposal. Many of you attended that field hearing here in Bloomington. But after the election this fall, we turned from wanting an amendment to the Constitution to undo Citizens United to just, can we keep our Constitution, please? And that led us to seek out one of the most active national pro-democracy groups, Indivisible. Founded by former congressional staffers, they have good practical strategies. A lot of your questions were about this. What can we do? Why aren't we talking about what we can do? They have really good practical strategies for how our voices are tracked and heard. And we have learned a lot. Anybody can get on these national Zoom calls, Thursday, 3 to 4. Just go to their website. You can sign up. They're really informative. A lot of you asked, does it make any difference if I call more than once? Does it make any difference if I bundle what I say? It's important to keep calling. Only call about one issue. They say it's ticked off. And if you have a list of things you don't like or do like, the first one is the only one they're going to bother with. The rest are going to get lost. A lot of people feel like it doesn't do any good to call. It does a lot of good to call. They're getting a lot of feedback from within congressional offices. Democrats need more cover. Republicans need more push. And I imagine that a lot of those strategies hold true in the General Assembly here in the state. There are a lot of chapters springing up. There's an Indivisible Central Indiana in Indianapolis. There's a new one that just formed in the Bloomington area, Indivisible South Central Indiana. There's one, believe it or not, forming in Linton in Greene County. I know, right? So, in addition to our monthly alerts that focus on state issues, we will be adding rapid response emails for all these fast-moving tentacles that are reaching into areas that affect us all. If you want to sign up for those alerts, there's a sheet going around. Go back to our table. There's another place. You know, Bloomington is rich in groups that do deep dives into specific areas. And boy, are we grateful for that. We all benefit from their work. But we still have to be mindful of who is directing those tentacles. One of our sons is captain for the National Geographic Sea Lion, and one of his opportunities was to scuba dive while being filmed. And it turns out that octopuses are playful, they are intelligent, and they're a little bit sneaky. When you're filming them in their lair, they're very quiet, watchful, but they don't interact with you. But when you turn around to swim away, pretty soon he felt a tentacle on this leg, he felt a tentacle on that leg, and he had been cautioned, you don't let them have more than 2 tentacles on you. So the videographer had to stop what he was doing and start, no, let's not do that. Pull that one off, pull that one. And I think that's really good advice for all of us. You know, you no longer have children in public school. Care about families who do. You have good health and good health insurance. Care about the people who don't. You've never had any trouble voting. You've never been marginalized. You know where to get true information. Man, there's a lot of people that have misinformation. They're marginalized and their votes are being suppressed. We all have to care. We all have to work together. And the key is that will keep us from becoming enveloped. Thank you.
The energy developed here today is palpable. Let's keep it going. Before we leave today, we'd like to thank the UU Church for the use of this wonderful space. The audio staff of the UU Church, thank you. Scott Rogers from Who's Left for the streaming of this, and Scott Higgins, who took video of the entire event. And lastly, but not least, we'd like to thank the folks who served as panelists, and for Senator Yoder and Representative Pierce, who give of their time to represent us in what has to be some very frustrating times. Thank you for coming today, and we hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.
That was the People Powered Democracy Town Hall from Bloomington this past Saturday. I'll have links to all the organizations represented on the panel in the show notes. Now, if you've listened to this whole thing, I don't want to keep you much longer, but I do want to revisit the words of Indiana Rural Summit organizer Michelle Higgs, channeling political scientist Erica Chenoweth, who argues that nonviolent campaigns are more likely to succeed because they can recruit many more participants from a much broader demographic. Nonviolent protest seems to be the best way to get that widespread support. She explains, numbers really matter for building power in ways that can really pose a serious challenge to entrenched authorities. There weren't any campaigns that had failed after they had achieved 3.5% participation. If indeed movements that have mobilized 3.5% of their population in sustained, nonviolent active participation achieve their aims, then this transformative vision gives me a renewed imagination for change. And Michelle went on to detail how few people it actually takes to build a real movement, how if each of us mobilized just 10 people, we could seriously challenge entrenched power. For entirely too long, most of us have taken our freedoms for granted, assuming they were safe forever, or that someone else would take care of things. That fairy tale is over. We have only ourselves. Individually, we don't stand a chance, but together, if we organize, we can still achieve a just, equitable future. I've included links to a lot of great organizations. Get involved with one, or if there isn't something in your area, start something yourself. Real democracy is invigorating and contagious. Let's make it go viral. What do you think? Let me know in the comments, or holler at me on social media, on Facebook, Blue Sky, YouTube, and TikTok at Who's Left, and on most other social media sites at ScottRudge78. You can also email me at scott@whosleft.us. Thanks to everybody who participated in this town hall, with one last swipe at the cowardly Republicans who wouldn't face their own constituents. Thank you for listening. If you can, head over to whosleft.us and help support this project with a paid subscription. Again, hit me up on social media with your feedback, tips, ideas, and concerns. Please forward the show to a friend and have them forward it to another friend. Let's keep building this project and a truly democratic state, one conversation at a time. Until the next one, this has been the Who's Left podcast. I'm Scott Aaron Rogers. Love each other, Indiana.